They call me Miss Margaret of the Herbs. Every Saturday morning, I set up my little booth at the Ashbury Farmers Market. Same folding table, same blue and white checkered cloth, same jars filled with dried lavender, lemon balm, chamomile, calendula. I've been doing this for almost 15 years now. The people who come here know me for my teas, for my soft voice, for the way I listen, like their pain matters. They ask me what to steep for anxiety, or what helps with sleeplessness, or what to brew when your husband's been coughing through the night. They trust me. They like me. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Sometimes, I catch my reflection in the metal tea scoops and wonder how that woman's smiling, stable, still with her hair brushed into a bun and her skirt ironed is even real. I wonder how many of them could look me in the eye if they knew what I've survived. Whether they'd still accept their herbal advice from me if I said, the man who violated me every night for 10 years was the same boy I once kissed goodnight and tucked in with lullabies. People don't expect that kind of story from someone like me, because I smile, because I hand out bags of peppermint for digestion and draw hearts on my receipts, because I wear soft shoes and hum gospel songs under my breath while weighing loose sage. No one ever sees what's behind the smile. Not that I blame them. Ashbury is a small town, a lovely town, the kind where people know your dog's name before they know your own. There are clapboard houses and maple trees that flame red in the fall, and at the heart of it all is the market baskets of root vegetables, homemade jams, candles made of beeswax, and me, Miss Margaret, at the end table with the herbs and the pale green apron that says, "Healing takes time." I chose that phrase carefully, because time doesn't erase what happened. It just teaches you how to hold it differently, how to carry it quieter. Time has taught me how to live around a story that no one wants to hear, a story that would empty a room if I spoke it out loud, but there are days when the weight presses too close to my ribs and I have to let it breathe. This is one of those days. You see, I didn't always live like this. My life wasn't always lavender oil and salves for joint pain. I didn't always know the names of plants that calm the body. For the longest time, my body wasn't a place of calm at all. It was a prison, a wound. And my son Caleb was the one who made it that way. Even now, writing his name makes my fingers slow down on the page. Caleb. I carried him alone, loved him alone, raised him with the kind of love you don't just give, you pour. I stitched his Halloween costumes with tired hands after 10-hour factory shifts. I saved spare change to buy him science kits and sneakers he could grow into. I told myself over and over again, he'll grow up to be a good man, he'll never feel unwanted like I did. And for a long time, I believed I had done it right. He was quiet, polite. Teachers loved him, neighbors praised him. When he smiled at me, I saw a future where all my sacrifices meant something. But time has a way of peeling back the layers, of showing you what was there all along. By the time I learned who he really was, it was too late. By the time the lines between caregiver and predator blurred beyond recognition, I had already lost the ability to run, to fight, to scream loud enough. A stroke took my left side, but it was Caleb who took everything else. People who hear the word rape think of alleyways, strangers, scream and fight scenes. What they don't picture is a mother, a houseplant by the window, a blue porcelain cup cooling beside the bed. Yes, I remember the exact cup. He brought it home from a trip once, Caleb, with his boyish grin and that, "I thought of you, Mom" voice, pale blue with ivy curling around the handle. I drank my tea from it every night before bed. I don't use it anymore, but I haven't thrown it away either. Because here's the thing about surviving something like that. You don't get to rewrite it, but you do get to own it. And sometimes, owning it starts with saying it aloud. So here it is. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I am 72 years old. I live in Ashbury, Vermont. I grow herbs. I make tea. I've known love. I've known horror. And I am still standing. The man who hurt me most is not a stranger. He is the boy I once nursed through fevers. The child whose shoes I tied. The same boy I once kissed goodnight, praying that he would become a kind and gentle man. He didn't, and I will no longer carry his shame in silence. So before you ask me about mint or valerian root, know this. I am not just Miss Margaret of the herbs. I am also the woman who looked her nightmare in the face and lived to tell the truth. And this, what you're hearing now, is only the beginning. People often ask if I have any regrets. Not many, I tell them. But that's not true. I have one. I regret loving him too blindly. I regret pouring everything into a dream that never became real. And more than anything, I regret not seeing the cracks when they were still small enough to seal. His name was Caleb. He was born in the spring of 1970, during the kind of rainstorm that makes trees bend at the knees. I was just 19, barely grown. My parents were already gone by then, mother taken too early by illness, father broken long before that by whiskey and silence. When I told the man I was seeing that I was pregnant, he said he needed to think. He never came back. No ring, no crib, no promises. Just me, a growing belly, and a rented room above a laundromat on Lincoln Street. I named him Caleb Matthew Whitmore Matthew, for the man I thought would be his father. It felt like a kind of defiance to still give the name, even if he'd vanished before I could say it aloud. There wasn't time to feel sorry for myself. Rent didn't wait. Babies didn't wait. So I took a job at Lennox Dyer's Textiles, stitching in a long row of women hunched over machines under the hum of fluorescent lights. The factory smelled of bleach and cotton dust. My fingers blistered in the first week. By the second month, the skin had turned tough and numb. I worked 10 hours a day, sometimes more. I'd come home, sore in places no one could see, and rock my baby to sleep in a hand-me-down cradle that creaked louder than it comforted. And still I loved it. I loved him. Caleb had dark eyes and pale lashes, the kind of newborn people stop to coo at. He was quiet even then, like he was listening. Like he understood I had no one else but him. I didn't know what it meant to raise a child alone, not really. I only knew what I had missed as a girl: tenderness, safety, a warm voice in the next room. I promised myself I would give Caleb everything I had never been given. Every lullaby, every soft touch, every scrap of safety I could sew together with two blistered hands. In the early years, that's what motherhood was for me, a kind of sacred mission. I packed his lunches with notes inside. I mended his school uniforms before they had time to fray. I saved up to buy him books, even if it meant skipping dinner sometimes. I told myself, he'll read these stories, he'll grow up good, he'll see how hard I worked and become a man who's gentle and just. And for a long while, it seemed to be working. Caleb was polite, smart enough, always said thank you, always opened the door for neighbors. His teachers liked him. He wasn't a star student, but he never got into trouble. He kept his room clean, took out the trash, gave me hugs before bed, called me mama, long after most boys had dropped the word. When he was 11, he made me a Mother's Day card with a drawing of the two of us standing in front of the tiny house we rented. On the inside, in that uneven handwriting of boyhood, he'd written, "You're the strongest person I know. When I grow up, I'll take care of you." I kept that card in a kitchen drawer for years. People used to say, "You're so lucky. Caleb is such a good boy." And I would smile and say, "He's my biggest blessing." I believed it, with my whole heart. But looking back now, I realize something that hurts worse than any memory. There was no one else. No partner to point out what I missed. No family to see the signs. No second pair of eyes watching how his affection sometimes lingered a second too long. I was the only witness, and I had already made up my mind to see him as good. That's what no one tells you about single motherhood, especially when you're young and scared and trying so hard not to fail. You create a story in your head, one where your child is everything you dreamed he'd be, because you need it to be true. Because the alternative that you gave your life to someone who might one day hurt you is too unbearable to entertain. So you justify. You explain away the shadows. You call what's strange just a phase. You say, boys are affectionate, and he's just protective, and he doesn't have a father, so maybe he clings a little tighter. I said all of that. I said it out loud, and worse, I said it to myself. The truth is, I didn't just love Caleb. I built my entire identity around being his mother. He was my proof that I was good, that I had survived what came before him. that the pain of being abandoned wouldn't be the last note in my life. Maybe I loved him so hard, I taught him he could break me. That line took me years to admit. Years of therapy, of silence, of shame. I don't say it to absolve him. God, no. I say it to understand myself, to understand how a woman like me, smart, hardworking, kind, could have been so blind for so long. There's a photo I still keep, buried deep in the back of a drawer. Caleb is about 8, grinning with both front teeth missing, standing next to a pumpkin he carved all by himself. I'm beside him, crouched down, smiling like I'd just won the lottery. Sometimes I look at that photo and wonder, did he already know then? Did he already see the power he held in that small, soft frame? Or was it later, when I got sick, when I needed him? The line between love and control is thin, especially when one person needs the other to survive. I crossed it every day without knowing, and he learned from it in silence. But not everything I gave him turned to poison. Not everything I did came undone. I still believe that part of him, some early, buried part, once loved me too. He just chose to kill it, and I chose not to see when it died. He was 18 the first time I noticed it. That pause, that lingering, the kind of look that doesn't belong on a boy's face when he's watching his mother. It wasn't just a hug anymore, and I knew it, and so did he, but I didn't say a word. I smiled and walked back to the stove. That's how it begins, you know, not with a scream or a slap or some unmistakable act of violence. It begins with a look that stays too long, a hand that brushes a place it shouldn't, a tone of voice that's too sweet, too slow, too thick with something you can't name. And it catches you off guard, because this is your child, your baby, the one whose nose you wiped, whose nightmares you soothed, the last person in the world you're supposed to fear. But I did, not all at once. Fear comes quietly when you've spent your whole life pretending you're safe. That fall, Caleb had started community college, commuting from home to save money. He worked evenings at a hardware store and kept his side of the house clean. At least, that's what I told people when they asked how he was doing. Still living at home, still a good boy. But he had started to hover. That's the word that comes to mind when I remember those days. Hovering. I'd be in the kitchen, slicing onions, and suddenly he'd appear behind me. No footsteps, no warning. Just there, reaching for a glass or leaning against the fridge, watching me with that flat gaze. Not curious, not warm, just watching. He started giving me long hugs before bed. They'd last just a beat too long. His arms would stay around my waist when I tried to step away. One night he kissed me on the cheek, and I could feel it, a hesitation, a weight to the contact that made my skin crawl. I pulled back, laughing nervously, saying, "What's gotten into you?" He just smiled. "Nothing." "Can't I hug my mama?" He said it like a joke, but there was no laughter in his eyes. One night, I came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, hurrying toward my bedroom when I felt eyes on me. I turned. Caleb was at the end of the hall, phone in hand, pretending to text. He wasn't even trying to look away, just standing there. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was the hallway light, that I was tired, but my heart knew better. That night I locked my bedroom door, for the first time in my life. And the part that shamed me most wasn't that I did it. It was that I had no idea how to explain it to myself. I told myself I was being cautious, that I'd seen too many crime shows, that I was a woman living alone with a teenage son, and it was normal to feel uneasy sometimes. But it wasn't normal. Not for me, not for Caleb. I had never locked a door against my own child, until that night. And then there was the cup. He gave it to me for my 60th birthday. A blue porcelain teacup with white ivy curling up the handle. "Handmade," he said. He'd found it at a craft fair and thought of me. I remember holding it in my hands, the glaze cool and perfect. "You always drink your tea before bed," he said. "Now you have a proper cup for it." There was something so tender about the gesture, so intimate. I wanted to be touched by it, but when I looked at the cup, something in me flinched, not from the gift itself, but from the way he watched me open it, from the way his eyes traced the movement of my hands, like he was memorizing the moment, not as a son, but as something else. Something I couldn't name yet, but felt deep in my stomach like spoiled milk. Still, I thanked him. I said it was beautiful. I brewed my chamomile in it that night and every night after, because that's what mothers do. We honor the love we think we see, even when it's laced with something darker. That cup stayed on my nightstand for years. I'd drink from it and stare at the wall, or sometimes I'd hold it in both hands just to feel something steady, something solid. I used to tell myself that the cup was proof that he still loved me in the right way. That maybe I was imagining the shift in his eyes, that maybe, with time, whatever was broken in him would heal. But deep down, I think I knew. I knew when he brushed past me in the hallway, letting his hand drag across my back. I knew when he offered to give me a massage after a long shift, and his fingers wandered to places they shouldn't. I knew when I found the bathroom door unlocked after I was sure I had closed it. And I knew when I started making excuses to avoid being in the house with him alone. I just couldn't say it. Not even to myself, because saying it meant facing a truth I wasn't ready for. That something sacred had cracked open. That my love had not protected him from darkness. That maybe, in trying so hard to be everything for him, I'd left no room for him to grow into someone else. That maybe I had loved him so hard, I'd erased the boundary between worship and blindness. One night, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table long after Caleb had gone to bed. The lights were off, the house quiet. My hands were wrapped around that blue cup, the tea inside long cold. And all I could think was, this is not the house I raised him in. This is not the boy I knew. I locked my bedroom door again that night, and the next night, and every night after that. Until even the sound of the lock clicking became its own kind of lullaby, sharp, metallic, reassuring. I never told anyone, because how do you say it out loud? That your son's hugs feel wrong, that the cup he gave you for your birthday now makes your hands tremble, that every time he walks past you, you flinch like prey. You don't. You just pour the tea, lock the door, and hope it's all in your head, but it wasn't. And soon, he stopped knocking. It was March 12th, a Thursday. I remember because I'd circled the date on the little calendar by the fridge. It was payroll day at Lennox, and I needed to stop by the post office on my way home. I had plans to pick up a new batch of chamomile for the garden that weekend, and the weather, for once, was behaving. Clear sky, air sharp with the scent of snowmelt and early daffodils. I remember standing at the kitchen sink that morning, pouring hot water into the blue porcelain cup Caleb had given me, steam rising like a spirit. I remember sipping slowly, trying to ease the heaviness in my left shoulder that had been bothering me all week. I brushed it off as age, as fatigue. I'd spent too many years brushing things off. The rest came in flashes. The hiss of the factory steam vents, the whirring of 50 machines, the smell of scorched fabric, and then nothing, no sound, no sight. Just a sudden, blinding pain at the base of my skull, like lightning cracking through bone. They told me later I collapsed without a word, that my coworkers screamed, that someone called an ambulance, that I was unconscious before I hit the floor. All I remember is the feeling like my body no longer belonged to me, like the inside of me had melted, slumped to one side, and refused to return. I woke up in a hospital room with white walls and the sound of machines breathing for me. My mouth was dry, my tongue felt like sandpaper, and when I tried to lift my left arm, nothing happened. Not a twitch, not a tremor, just stillness. My brain screamed the command, but my body had already stopped listening. The stroke had paralyzed the entire left side of my body. They called it a cerebrovascular accident. A moderate one, they said, though nothing about it felt moderate. My face drooped, my speech slurred, my leg wouldn't hold my weight. Even the simplest things, sitting up, swallowing water, had to be relearned like I was a baby again. And suddenly, I wasn't Miss Margaret of the Herbs anymore. I was a patient, a burden, a woman who needed help to use the toilet. I remember the first time I saw Caleb at the hospital. He came in with a bouquet of carnations and a look of pure devotion. His voice was gentle, his hands warm. He held my fingers and said, "I'm going to take care of you, Mama. just like you always took care of me." The nurses cooed. "He's such a good boy. You're lucky to have a son like that. Most folks don't get that kind of love." And I smiled, because I had no choice, because I couldn't speak properly yet, because nodding and smiling was easier than trying to explain the shadow I saw behind his eyes. They discharged me after 3 weeks, with strict instructions for in-home therapy and a social worker assigned to check in twice a week. But Caleb said no, said he could handle it. Said he'd watched every YouTube video on stroke recovery, printed out all the articles, said, "Why let strangers in the house when I know what's best for you?" I tried to protest, but he smiled that soft, dangerous smile and said, "Don't you trust me, Mama?" And I didn't have the words to say no. That's how it started. He moved me into the downstairs bedroom, put up rails, rearranged furniture, placed a bell on the nightstand in case I needed him. At first, he was careful, gentle. He fed me, helped me bathe, brushed my hair. He read aloud from the newspaper each morning like it was still our old life. But it didn't take long for things to shift. The first time came during a bath. He lifted me from the chair with one arm around my waist, the other under my legs. His grip was too tight. His fingers pressed into places they didn't need to touch. I thought maybe it was just awkwardness, that he hadn't figured out the proper way to maneuver my body yet. But then he lingered. His hand didn't move away. It slid, slow, intentional. And when I flinched, he laughed. "Relax, I'm helping. I'm the only one who will." After that, every act of care became a question mark. How long his hands stayed on my skin, how closely he hovered during dressing, how often he used words like cleaning or checking or massaging when all I wanted was distance. And I couldn't move. Not my left leg, not my left arm. Couldn't run, couldn't fight, couldn't even push him away with enough force to mean anything. I became trapped inside myself. That's the part most people don't understand about paralysis. It's not just the body. It's the betrayal of your own limbs. You want to scream, but your mouth fails. You want to slap a hand away, but your arm lies like dead weight at your side. You become a house with no doors, no windows, no voice to shout from. And he knew that. He knew it better than anyone. Soon he dismissed the visiting therapist, said the woman was rough with me, that I had cried after sessions, that strangers didn't know how to care for someone like me. I hadn't cried, I hadn't even spoken, but the woman never came back. The social worker stopped calling. Caleb told her I was resting, that I needed quiet, that I got agitated with visitors. He created a world where only he existed, only his hands, only his voice, only his version of the story. Outside, neighbors waved and said, "Caleb's such a good son." Inside, I couldn't stand without his arm beneath mine. Couldn't eat unless he fed me. Couldn't sleep without hearing his footsteps pacing the hall. And then one day, I dropped the blue cup. My right hand, the only one that still worked, trembled. It slipped. The porcelain hit the floor and cracked clean in two. I stared at it for a long time. And when Caleb came rushing in and asked what happened, I looked at the broken cup and whispered the only word I could form clearly, "Sorry." He smiled. "It's just a cup," he said, picking up the pieces. But he kept the broken shards in a box on the shelf, like a souvenir, like proof of something only he understood. And that's when I knew. I wasn't just sick. I wasn't just helpless. I was his. And that terrified me more than the stroke ever had. I used to believe that silence was mercy, that if I didn't speak of pain, it couldn't spread, that quiet was strength. But now I know better. Silence can be a cage. And the worst kind of scream is the one that dies inside your own throat. It had been 2 months since the stroke. The visits had stopped. The phone had been unplugged. And Caleb, my son, my caretaker, my captor, had become the only voice I heard, the only hands I felt, the only presence in the house. The doorbell never rang anymore. The windows stayed shut, draped with heavy curtains. I don't remember when the living room clock stopped ticking, but when it did, no one replaced the battery. Time became something he controlled. He fed me on a schedule he decided. He changed my clothes when he felt like it. He gave me medications I couldn't verify, said the labels had rubbed off, and he kept telling me, "This is for your good, Mama. You need help. You need me." But what he meant was, "You belong to me." The first full assault came on a Monday. It was raining, I think. Or maybe I only imagined the rain. He called it a routine check. Said he needed to make sure I wasn't developing bed sores. That circulation had to be encouraged. That the doctor said touch was important. I told him no, or I tried to. But my mouth wouldn't form the words. My left side was limp, my right too weak to resist. So I lay there paralyzed in every way and watched my own child violate me with hands that once clutched my pinky finger as a toddler. I screamed, loud, from my chest, hoarse and frantic. I screamed so hard I felt my ribs shake. But the house swallowed the sound. It was an old house. Thick walls, heavy insulation, no one next door. We'd lived on the edge of town since Caleb was 10, where the yards stretched out and the only thing that separated you from your neighbor was a row of pine trees and silence. Silence that kept everything inside. The windows were locked, the curtains drawn. The world outside kept humming, unaware. I remember turning my head and seeing the blue cup on the nightstand. That ridiculous, lovely, treacherous teacup. Its smooth curve, its delicate handle, the ivy that climbed in spirals so carefully painted, so falsely innocent. It stared back at me, the one item in the room that hadn't changed, hadn't aged, hadn't lost control. I stared at that cup like it might scream for me, like it might fall, shatter, send some signal through the walls. I begged it in my head, break, please, just fall and break. Let the sound bring someone. But it didn't move. It just sat there, watching, holding its silence like a weapon. And when he finished, when he pulled the blanket back over my trembling body, like a nurse tucking in a patient, he kissed my forehead and said, "I'm all you've got, Mama. Don't forget that." Then he took the bell from the nightstand, the one I used to ring when I needed water, or the bathroom, or just to feel like someone could hear me. He took the bell and left the cup. I don't know how long I cried that night. Crying felt like betrayal to myself, to the woman I had once been, to the mother I tried so hard to be. But it was all I had left. And even that made no sound anyone would answer. After that day, the violations became routine. He disguised them in medical terms. He called them daily care, necessary procedures, mobility exercises. Sometimes he talked to me while doing it, as if nothing was wrong. Other times he turned the TV on loud so I wouldn't hear my own breathing. I counted the ceiling tiles, the slow blink of the smoke detector light, the cracks in the wall I used to mean to paint, anything to avoid feeling what I was forced to feel. The blue cup remained. Every morning he brought my tea in it. He'd place it in my one working hand like some twisted ritual. "Your favorite," he'd say, "chamomile, just like you like it." Sometimes I gripped it too tight, wishing I had the strength to throw it, to send it flying across the room, to hear it shatter against the wall. But I never did. I couldn't. My body, my mind, too slow, too afraid, too shattered. So the cup stayed whole, and I stayed broken. I tried to pray, but prayer felt like speaking into a well that never echoed back. I whispered to the ceiling, to the air, to anyone or anything that might be listening. But all I heard in return was his voice at the door. "Mama, you ready for your checkup?" I wanted to disappear, but you don't disappear when you're disabled. You just sit there alive, aware, but unmovable, a witness to your own desecration. I thought of running away, but how? I couldn't even sit up without help. My body was his terrain, my silence his permission, and no one, not one person came to check. The world saw a devoted son. They saw Caleb pushing my wheelchair into the backyard. They saw him at the market, picking up soup and applesauce. They said, "He's such a good boy." They said, "You're lucky, Miss Margaret. Not every mother gets that kind of love." And I'd smile, And they never noticed the way my smile trembled at the corners, because screaming changes nothing when no one's listening, because sometimes even the cup doesn't fall. The scream rose before I even realized it was mine. It tore from the bottom of my chest like something had finally splintered loose, something buried under years of paralysis, silence, and the echo of his footsteps. This time, I didn't try to hold it back. I let it fly, and it cut through the house like a blade. Caleb had me pinned down again, his voice soft, his fingers clinical, like he was changing a bandage. But I could feel it, like always. That invisible, shifting line between care and control, between tenderness and desecration. And that morning, something in me snapped. I screamed, louder than ever, louder than I thought I could. It wasn't a cry, it was a roar. And this time, someone heard it. Mrs. Johnson lived next door. A widow in her late 70s, hard of hearing but sharp-eyed, with a brisk way of speaking and a lawn she mowed herself. We'd shared pies and fence conversations for over 2 decades, but in the last few years, I hadn't seen her much. Caleb said she was losing her memory, said she was forgetful, that it was better I didn't get agitated by visitors who wouldn't remember things anyway. But I knew better. Mrs. Johnson wasn't fading. She was watching. And that day, God bless her, she was listening too. I didn't hear her come in. But suddenly there was shouting, a slam, a woman's voice barking Caleb's name like a curse. And then, she was in my room. Mrs. Johnson, her hair wild, her slippers half off, and a fury in her eyes I had never seen before. She stormed past the threshold like a soldier and pushed Caleb back with more strength than I knew she had. "What the hell is going on in here?" she snapped. He stammered, said he was helping me, that I was confused, that the stroke had made me emotional. But she didn't look at him. She looked at me. She saw the tear-stained face, the cracked lips, the bruise beginning to bloom on my wrist. And then her eyes landed on my neck, where his hand had left a red, unmistakable print. "Get away from her," she said. Quiet, steady. And Caleb, this boy who had ruled my world with silence and threat, stepped back. She turned to me. "Margaret, can you hear me?" I blinked. I tried to nod. My head barely moved. "We're going to the hospital," she said. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She called 911. While we waited, Caleb paced the hallway, muttering to himself, trying to piece together a lie that would hold. But it was too late. The mask had cracked, and once a neighbor sees your real face, you can't pull it back on. The paramedics came. 2 young men, wide-eyed when they saw me. Mrs. Johnson spoke for me, sharp and precise. "This woman has been abused. I don't care what he tells you, look at her." They took me in a stretcher. Caleb tried to follow. Mrs. Johnson stopped him. "You're not going anywhere near her again," she said. And the look in her eyes, steel and sorrow, was enough to make even him freeze. At the hospital, they ran tests, checked vitals, whispered outside the curtain, and then finally, someone closed the door, sat down beside me, and asked a question I had waited 8 years to hear. It was a woman, a doctor, maybe mid-40s, clear voice, kind eyes. She didn't use small talk. She looked me straight in the face and asked, "Margaret, is someone in your home hurting you?" I wanted to speak, to pour it all out, but the words were still stuck in my throat, so I did the only thing I could manage. I nodded, a small, broken, barely there nod. But it was enough. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She reached over and took my hand, my one working hand, and said, "You're safe now. We believe you, and we're going to help." I started to cry, not from fear this time, but from relief. A flood of tears I hadn't let fall in years. Tears for every time the bell went unanswered. For every morning I drank tea in that cursed blue cup, waiting for something to change, for the body that had betrayed me, and for the woman who finally heard me through the wall. Mrs. Johnson, not a social worker, not a therapist, not a cop, just a neighbor, a widow. A woman with ears to hear and eyes that still burned with justice. She came to visit me at the hospital the next day, brought me a bag of peppermint candies and a firm nod. "I've already told the sheriff everything I saw," she said. "I may be old, but I know a predator when I see one. I couldn't say thank you, but I reached for her hand and held it tight. That day, they started the process of separating Caleb from my care, a court petition, a temporary guardian, a legal wall rising between us. It would be a long road, but for the first time in nearly a decade, I wasn't walking it alone, because someone had heard me, because a woman behind the wall chose to act, and because finally my scream had reached the world beyond the blue cup. They arrested Caleb 3 days after my hospital admission. He still wouldn't admit to anything, not when questioned by the police, not when they listed the bruises, the medical reports, the missing therapist records, not even when Mrs. Johnson sat in the hallway outside the interview room, arms folded, waiting to testify. "He's lying," she told the nurse. "He's lied so well, so long, he believes it." The charges were serious. The social worker assigned to me said the state would proceed even if I couldn't testify in full, but they'd need as much as I could give. I nodded slowly. I'd learned the power of small nods. But once Caleb was gone, the fear didn't vanish. It simply changed shape. Now it was the fear of what came next. Because what happens to a woman like me, alone, half paralyzed, without a legal next of kin? They start talking about facilities, about placement, about long-term care options. I knew what that meant. A nursing home, a bed in a hallway, rooms that smelled like bleach and despair, strangers turning me, strangers feeding me, strangers wiping my chin. I would go from being property to being paperwork, and I wasn't sure which was worse. So I said no to visitors, no to volunteers, no to faith companions and community liaisons. The hospital staff was kind, but their kindness had edges. I saw the impatience in their eyes when I refused to sign the housing transfer form. I saw the pity when they glanced at my age, at my chart, at the blank emergency contact box. "She doesn't have family," one nurse whispered. "Then she won't last long," another replied. But I did have family. Once. Maybe. A cousin somewhere in Oregon. A niece by marriage in Florida I hadn't spoken to in decades. And a girl named Sarah. Sarah had been my mother's sister's daughter. We were close when we were little summers in the creek behind her house, embroidery on the porch steps, pink lemonade in jars. But her family moved away when I was 12. We lost touch, as children do. Life swept us into separate corners of the world. I hadn't thought of her in years. So when the nurse said, "There's a woman named Sarah here to see you," I nearly said no. "I don't know any Sarah," I mumbled. But she was persistent. "She says she's your cousin, that you embroidered a lavender handkerchief for her when you were 8. She's holding it right now." My heart skipped. The handkerchief. I hadn't thought of it in 50 years. It was silly. Pale linen, purple thread, a crooked S in the corner. I'd stitched it on the steps of my mama's house, tongue between my teeth, trying to impress Sarah with how grown up I was. I asked the nurse to let her in. She walked in slowly, not hesitant but careful, as if she knew the room carried ghosts. She was in her late 60s now, thin hair pulled back, cardigan draped over her arm, eyes bright behind oval glasses. And in her hands, the handkerchief, yellowed now, fragile, but unmistakably mine. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," she said softly. "But I remembered you. I never forgot." I couldn't speak, so I blinked hard. The tears came too fast. They warmed my cheeks like a thaw. "I heard about what happened," she went on. "A friend of mine works in administration here. She saw your name in the intake notes. I got in my car and drove straight through from Albany." I stared at her, so familiar, so far. "How?" I whispered. It came out crooked, slurred, but she understood. "How did I find you? I don't know. Maybe God, maybe luck, maybe that little lavender cloth." She smiled and held it up like a flag. I wanted to believe her, but the fear had roots now, deep ones. "You came for me?" I rasped. "Yes." Her voice didn't falter. "I know we haven't seen each other in decades, but you are my family, and I don't want you in some place where they don't know who you are. You deserve to finish your life with dignity. You deserve peace." I looked at the door, at the wall, at the shadow where Caleb used to stand. "No more men," I croaked. Her face softened. "There won't be. It's just me. And my daughter, Joanna. She's a nurse. We have a spare room. We'll set up everything you need. You can have the window that faces the garden, with lavender." I closed my eyes, saw the nightstand, the cup, the broken bell, the hand that never brought help. Then I looked again at Sarah, at the handkerchief, at the quiet steadiness in her face, and I nodded. A slow, fragile, trembling nod, the kind you give when your heart doesn't fully believe yet, but your soul is too tired to keep refusing the light. She stepped closer, sat beside the bed, took my hand. And just like that, after all those years, I wasn't alone anymore. Healing doesn't come like a flood. It comes like a single drop on dry earth, silent, unnoticed at first, until one day you realize the ground has softened just enough for something to grow. Claire was the first to treat me like a whole person. She was my physical therapist, young enough to be my granddaughter, but steady as a stone. She didn't speak in platitudes, didn't coo at me like I was a child. She arrived every Tuesday and Friday with a firm voice and gentle hands, and she called me Miss Margaret like it was sacred. "Don't think about what you can't do," she told me the first day we met. "Think about what hasn't left you yet." My first instinct was to laugh, or cry, or both. But instead I said, "Pain, that's what hasn't left." She nodded, unfazed. "Then let's teach it to carry something new." Claire worked with me slowly. She brought a foam ball the size of an apple and asked me to hold it with my right hand. My good hand. I could manage that, barely. She'd guide the ball to my left palm and wait. I stared at it, as if my gaze alone could summon movement. Nothing happened. Not the first week, not the second. But Claire never lost patience. "I see flickers," she said. "You're not done yet." At night, Sarah would help me to bed. Her daughter, Joanna, had converted the sunroom into a warm little bedroom filled with plants and soft light. It was the first time in years I'd been able to sleep without checking for footsteps in the hallway. Sarah didn't ask too many questions, but when she sat beside me in the evenings, she'd sometimes hum the same tune our mothers used to sing while shelling peas, a quiet reminder that I came from somewhere, from someone. It was Joanna, always so kind, so careful, who introduced me to the trauma counselor, a woman named Dr. Elkins. White hair, sharp eyes, and a notebook she rarely wrote in, she listened more than she spoke. "You're not a victim," she told me on the 4th session. "You're a survivor. And that's not just wordplay, it's a shift in gravity." I didn't know what to say. She kept going. "Your body was hurt, yes, but your spirit endured. You're here, you're telling the truth. You still drink tea, still cry when the birds sing outside your window. That's survival. That's resistance." Resistance. The word stayed with me, and so did the teacup. It had come with me from the hospital, carefully packed by the nurse at my request. Not because I loved it, but because I needed to see it, to confront it. It sat on my nightstand again, not as a symbol of captivity, but as a witness of everything, of every bruise, every silence, every choice I made not to die. Claire started using it during therapy. She would place it in front of me during our sessions, always just out of reach. "We're going to pick it up today," she said one morning, late spring sunlight warming the hardwood floor. "With your left hand." I stared at her. "That hand doesn't work," I muttered. She raised an eyebrow. "Not yet." We had tried this before. I would sit with my shoulders squared, my eyes locked on the curve of the handle, and nothing would move. It felt like trying to wake the dead. But that day, something was different. Maybe it was the sunlight. Maybe it was the way Sarah had braided my hair that morning, like Mama used to. Maybe it was Dr. Elkins' voice in my head. "Your body isn't your shame. Your silence was never consent." Maybe I just got tired of being still. Claire placed the cup in front of me again. Take your time. I looked at the cup. Blue porcelain. White ivy climbing the handle. It hadn't chipped, hadn't cracked. It had survived. So had I. I willed my left fingers to twitch. And they did. Just a shiver at first. Then more. I gasped. Claire froze, eyes wide. Do it again, she whispered. My fingers curled, slowly, awkwardly, like they were remembering what it meant to obey. The hand lifted, just barely, then lowered, then lifted again. I reached for the cup. My palm hovered over it. My fingers brushed the cool glaze. And then, against every law of despair I had ever believed, I gripped it. The cup didn't fall. But I did. Not to the floor, but into tears. Big, trembling sobs that shook my shoulders and soaked the collar of my sweater. Claire was crying too, quietly, like someone witnessing a birth. I held that cup in my left hand for the first time in years. It was the same cup, but my hand was new. My will was new. My silence had cracked. I did it, I whispered. Claire nodded, too choked to speak. Later that night, I placed the cup back on the nightstand. It looked smaller than I remembered, less powerful. Just a cup, nothing more. I wasn't afraid of it anymore because I had moved. And once a woman moves, really moves, not even God can put her back where she was. I thought the doorbell was a mistake. We didn't get visitors unannounced anymore. Sarah always called ahead. Joanna came on a schedule. The mailman never rang, and it was a Monday, rainy, quiet, the kind of day where the world keeps its distance. But the bell rang again, twice. Then a slow knock followed. Soft, hesitant. A sound I knew in my bones. Sarah wasn't home. She'd gone to pick up groceries. I was alone in the house, but I wasn't afraid, not like before. I sat in the kitchen, the teapot still warm, the blue cup in my hand. When I opened the door, I saw him. Caleb, older, thinner, bent in ways I hadn't remembered. His eyes, once sharp with calculation, were now dulled by something else, something that trembled at the edges of his mouth and stiffened his gait. He was using a walker. His hands shook as he adjusted his grip. There was a brace on his left leg. His skin had lost its glow. His voice, when he finally spoke, was a hoarse whisper. "Mama." The word landed in the doorway like a stone. I didn't speak. I didn't move. He looked me over my face, my posture, the way I stood tall, unaided, a kettle of tea still steaming behind me. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. I let the silence sit between us. Let it stretch, crackle, weigh. He shifted on his feet. "I've been sick. MS, they said. Multiple sclerosis. I can't work. Can't even dress myself some mornings. No one's willing to help me. I'm alone." I felt no surprise, no pity, only a stillness I had earned. He continued, his voice strained. "I'm sorry, Mama. I was wrong. I know I hurt you. I need help now. Please, just for a little while, until I can stand again." Stand. He wanted to stand. I remembered the nights I lay flat on that mattress, unable to lift my own body, his shadow crouched above me. I remembered the weight of his hands disguised as care, the bruises, the bells unanswered, the scream that took 8 years to break free, and now here he was pleading in the very doorway he once guarded like a prison wall. "I don't want to die like this," he whispered. I looked at him, long and full, not as a mother, not as a victim, as a witness, as a woman who had survived the man in front of her. "You've already died," I said. He flinched. His knees buckled slightly. I didn't offer to catch him. He gripped the walker tighter, wheezing now. "Please, I need mercy." I shook my head. "You need what you never gave." He closed his eyes. His lips pressed together like he might cry, but he didn't. Of course not. Caleb didn't cry, not even when he left fingerprints on my ribs or silence in my throat. He opened his eyes again. "You're not the only one who's suffered." That was the final straw. I stepped back, not to let him in, but to close the door without haste. "Now," I said, calm and steady, "you understand what helpless feels like." His mouth opened slightly. I didn't wait to hear more. I closed the door, softly, firmly, and turned the lock. Through the curtain, I watched him struggle down the steps, the walker rattling against the concrete. He didn't look back. I returned to the kitchen. The kettle had cooled slightly, but the tea was still warm. I poured a new cup. With my left hand, no shaking, no hesitation. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I sipped the tea slowly, letting it rest on my tongue like a hymn. Outside, the rain picked up. The house sighed around me. And for the first time in a decade, I belonged only to myself. I'm 72 now. Every Tuesday at 4 o'clock, the back room of my herb shop fills with women. Some come quietly, slipping in after work with their coats still damp from the rain. Some come openly, arms folded but eyes soft. We sit in a wide circle of chairs, no podium, no clipboard, no title. Just women, just stories, just the kind of truths the world doesn't always want to hear. They call it a support group, but I don't like that word. Support sounds temporary, like scaffolding. This is something else. This is reclamation. I make the tea myself now, with both hands. I blend chamomile and lemon balm from the garden behind the shop, dry the petals by the window, wrap them in paper sachets. I stamp with a little blue ivy leaf. People in town know me as Miss Margaret of the Herbs. They stop me in the market to ask what to brew for sleep or stress or stomach aches. They wave from porches. Some even send their teenage daughters to me when anxiety wraps too tight around their ribs. They trust me, they just don't know everything. I never told the whole story, not out loud, not to the town. Some things you speak only in safe circles. Some truths are stitched into silence not out of shame, but because they are sacred. Heavy, too real to be passed around like gossip. The women in my Tuesday group know more, but even they don't know about the cup. It sits on a shelf in the back of the shop, high but not hidden, blue porcelain, white ivy winding around its curve. No cracks, no chips, still whole. People ask about it sometimes. "It's beautiful," they say. I nod, but I never offer more. The truth is, I've thought about breaking it. I've stood in the quiet of the shop after closing, held it in both hands, felt the weight of it, the story it carries. I've imagined smashing it against the concrete floor, watching it burst into 1,000 pieces, scattering Caleb's shadow like ash, but I never do. I put it back on the shelf, every time, because it isn't just a reminder of what was done to me, it's a testament to what I lived through. That cup survived. So did I. But unlike the cup, I changed. I'm not the same woman who whispered for help into silence. I'm not the paralyzed body waiting for permission to feel anger. I'm not the trembling hands trying to make sense of love twisted into power. I'm a woman who moved her left hand, a woman who said no when it mattered, a woman who brewed her own tea, built her own space, and made room for others to speak. Sometimes women ask me, after Tuesday meetings, "Do you ever wish it had never happened?" And I always hesitate, not because I want it back, God no, but because that question comes from a world that still thinks survival should be clean. That justice means courtroom closure. That healing is something that arrives like mail, neatly folded, timely, complete. The truth is messier, more silent, more sacred. I don't wish it never happened. I wish I had been believed sooner. I wish no one else had to carry what I carried. But I don't wish away who I've become. I'm not proud of the pain. But I'm proud of how I hold it now. That's why the cup stays, not on display, not in hiding, just there on the shelf, still whole, still watching. People think healing looks like smashing things, burning journals, cutting ties. But sometimes, healing is in the restraint. I could have shattered that cup. I had every right to, but I didn't, because you don't have to destroy the past to survive it. Sometimes, surviving is the loudest justice. And that little blue cup, it never broke, but I did. And I came back together with hands stronger than porcelain. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched something in you, I hope you'll take a quiet moment today to breathe, to remember, or to speak. Not every wound leaves a scar you can see, and not every survivor stands on a stage. Some of us survive by lighting one small candle in the dark. Some of us survive by telling the truth, even if our voice shakes. If you've lived through something no one believed, if you've carried silence like a weight for far too long, if you've made it to the other side with nothing but your breath and your name, you are not alone. Your story matters. And if no one has told you that before now, let this be the moment you hear it. There's power in speaking. There's peace in being heard. And there's healing in knowing that someone, somewhere, is holding space for your voice, even if they've never met you. So if you feel ready, even just a little, say it out loud. Tell someone you trust. Or write it down. Or whisper it into the quiet. Not because you owe the world an explanation, but because you deserve to exist fully in your own story. If Margaret's journey resonated with you, please take a second to like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so you never miss a new story. Every subscription helps us bring more voices out of the silence and into the light. We believe that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can say is simply, "This happened to me, and I'm still here." Until next time, take care of your voice, your heart, and your story. We'll be waiting here with another cup of tea and another chapter.